Welcome back to the review, another Tuesday edition of our podcast here on CBB Review. Matt Mlodzinski, and I'm joined by Ariel Puterman, Kansas beat writer, Big 12 beat writer. He does everything, the NBA draft. He really does it all for CBB Review. Before we get started, we start out with these quick monologues. I'm just going off the top of my head right here. College basketball, I don't want to say has been dry in the past couple of days, but since that Gonzaga-Iowa big-time matchup, hasn't been much. Kind of shifted to football for a few days, but in 3 days now, Christmas, and there is Christmas college basketball, and there's a couple decent games out of the Big Ten. One of them real good. That's at 12:30 Eastern time. It's Wisconsin and Michigan State. Definitely two teams with perhaps even Final Four ability when you look at them. But I kind of wanted to take a different approach from it. I mean, I know that for years now, football has been playing on Thanksgiving, and basketball, the NBA, has been played on Christmas. And sometimes you just wonder, is that the right way to do it at the college game? I know that college football and college basketball have both done it for quite some time, but like any holiday, there's plenty of people on these teams who celebrate Christmas, and you just have to think like, okay, for college, since it's amateur, should they be able to go home to their families? I don't know. I mean, it's definitely going to be a good watch, but it's just something to keep in mind. I just want to say that hopefully all of them are able to do something with their families, and I'm sure that the coaches are mindful of that too. But those are some good games, and we have a lot to talk about as well. So I'm going to shift over to our first big topic today, and that's the Big 12 and the ACC. And I feel like in normal years, a lot of people are like, oh, the ACC can get 10, 11 teams in perhaps. This year, not so much. You see a lot of these teams struggling. It's a very even conference. And with that evenness, it's not like it's even at the top. I mean, there are a lot of mediocre teams that are looking at 6, 7, 8 seeds right now. And you look at the Big 12, and it's the exact opposite. The Big 12 a lot of times can be dominated by Kansas. Sometimes you'll have one or two other teams up there. This year, there's a solid 5 teams in the Big 12 that I could think of right off the top of my head that could honestly compete for a Final Four or even further a national championship. And Ariel, like I said, Big 12 writer, Kansas writer as well. I guess I'll start with this. In your mind, is the Big 12 the deepest conference at the top?
I would say at the top, definitely. There's 5 teams: Baylor, Kansas, West Virginia, Texas Tech, and Texas. I don't think any conference's top 5 could beat their top 5. All 5 of them, sorry, could be top 10 teams at the end of the season. Baylor's a top 2 team for sure. Kansas has found ways to win all the time. Same with West Virginia and Texas. Texas Tech's very iffy, but with Coach Beard and Mac McClung, they've had signs of growth. But in terms of deepest conference overall, I'd still have to go with the Big Ten. We've seen what they've done this season. Teams like Northwestern, who are projected to finish towards the bottom, just beat Michigan State. Purdue did the same with Ohio State. So I'd say at the top, you have to go with Big 12, but top to bottom, probably you have to go with the Big 10.
I think what's interesting, and you noted those 5 teams: Kansas, Baylor, West Virginia, Texas, and Texas Tech. And when you look at the Big Ten, you see a lot of those teams. I feel like the Big Ten is surrounded by scoring the basketball. Who can get to 90 first? I mean, you've got Rutgers, Illinois, Iowa. I mean, Wisconsin's one outlier, but most of the teams in the Big Ten are founded on scoring the ball, at least this year. And in the ACC, a little bit different. I mean, I think that's a lot more defense-oriented this year than most years. You see Duke and UNC kind of having to resort to their defense because they've struggled at times to put the ball in the basket. Other teams as well. Florida State's kind of been that way for a long time. In the Big 12, I feel like you get a little bit of both of it. You have your Baylors, your Texas Tech. Kansas this year plays really good defense, but I see Texas as a team that has plenty of guys that can score. Kansas, although I mentioned their defense, can really score the ball. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as far as kind of like how the Big 12 doesn't really have this identity. There's a ton of different teams that can do everything well.
Yeah, and that's what makes them so dangerous, the balance between that offensive defense. If you see the numbers, I believe that Texas Tech, Kansas, Baylor, and West Virginia are all top 10 in defensive efficiency, which is crazy. And we saw Baylor score 100 points on Saturday against Kansas State. And so it just shows how balanced that conference is, how they can do it on both sides of the floor. And honestly, great coaching too. We got Scott Drew, one of the best coaches. Bill Self, Hall of Fame coach. Bob Huggins, soon to be Hall of Fame coach. Coach Beard, one of the top coaches also. So it just shows how good these teams are, how well coached, and how balanced these teams are, which is going to make them so dangerous in March. And we may see even 2 teams in the Final Four from the Big 12.
Yeah, those are great coaches. I mean, you don't even mention a Jamie Dixon, whose TCU isn't really in the thick of things, but he's still a fantastic coach. Big 12 obviously gets underrated in the coaching department, but I want to look, I guess I'll stay with the Big 12. You look at the Big 12 bottom feeders. I mean, to me, that's kind of like your Kansas States. TCU's on and off this year. I don't know if I'd call them a bottom feeder, but it's just because the top of the Big 12 is just so good that they seem a little bit lower. Iowa State, really, they're in struggling a lot without Tyrese Halliburton. But do you think that any of the bottom feeders could maybe by the end of the season turn it around and strengthen the overall makeup of this conference?
Yeah, I think a team to watch is TCU. They beat Oklahoma State on the road last week. They've beaten Liberty, which is a solid team, and they've beaten Texas A&M, who are a solid team. I don't think they're going to finish top 5 by any means, but I think that they can play some close games against those higher teams like Kansas, West Virginia. I think they could even beat Texas Tech at home. So look out for TCU. Don't guarantee that they're going to make a March Madness spot or they're going to finish towards the top, but they're definitely going to be a team to watch in the near future.
Don't sleep on the Horned Frogs. And then we look at the ACC. Now, you look at the Big 12. I mean, I think we could pretty much agree. I know Oklahoma State can't get in the tournament this year. Otherwise, they probably would have. But the Big 12 will most likely get at least 6 teams into the tournament, maybe even 7. Again, if Oklahoma State was able to, they'd probably get 8 in. But you also look at the ACC, a team that's used to getting, at minimum 8, 9 teams in. Could they get less than 6 teams in the tournament? I kind of put that as an over-under number.
Yeah, it's going to be close. You have the locks. You have Florida State. Duke's going to make it even if they finish 1-50. UNC, the same thing, even though they missed it last year. Well, actually, we don't know that, but and then you got teams like Louisville as well. And then after that, it's very shaky. West Virginia Tech looked strong at the beginning of the year, have struggled a little bit. Teams like Pittsburgh, they just lost their best player for 6 to 8 weeks. So it's really unsure of how good they're going to be. We haven't seen – oh, and then, of course, Virginia. Tony Bennett, great coach, but they've also struggled a little bit. So this isn't the ACC we're used to. I think that's going to change in the future. This year, obviously a weird year. A lot of unpredictable things, and this is one of them.
So I guess the last point when we talk about these conferences, again, we're just looking at the Big 12 and the ACC primarily, but, the ACC, and you look at could a team step up and save the conference? I mean, I guess I'll point it one of 2 ways. I look at my team at Syracuse, and I see a team that's, 6-1 and has, a pretty good scoring ability. And then if they can turn the defense around, they could even be there as well. But then you also look at a team at the top like Virginia, who's not getting a lot of press, but they're still 3-1, and it was an early season loss. Could you see one of those teams turning it around? Can you see any team turning around and saving the ACC at least a little bit this season?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Virginia, last year they kind of started slow as well. And then towards the end of the season, they were one of the hottest teams in the country. And I think that, like I said, Tony Bennett's a great coach. They have a winning culture there. They know how to win games. They're great defensively. I think they just need to turn it around. And I'm actually going to ask you a question. We mentioned the Big 12. Who is that one bottom feeder that might sneak up to the top? Who do you think that is for the ACC?
For the ACC, gosh, I've got to look at it. Again, I mentioned Syracuse a little bit. I think NC State is another team. And I know they're not bottom feeders. They're kind of teams that are in the middle of the pack right now who maybe I think both NC State and Syracuse could potentially get up to the 4th or 5th team in the ACC. But if we're looking at a bottom feeder, and I have my standings up right now, gosh, I just can't see of any of the teams right now. I thought Notre Dame's looked pretty decent, but I just, I need to see more out of them because right now beating Kentucky isn't that huge of an accomplishment. At the beginning of the year, I thought BC was looking good after they played close with Villanova, and they've been completely terrible since. So I really can't tell you, but I would say that it'd more likely be a team that's maybe sitting middle of the pack right now that all of a sudden you could see at the end of the year, like, okay, this team wasn't projected to finish high, but they could be up there. And I'm glad you asked me that question too. I think that was you put me on the spot, and I was like, you know what, this is tougher than it thinks like. Like I'm not sure who the bottom feeder would be.
Yeah, and ACC is a weird conference this year for sure.
It is weird. It is weird. Um, not like it normally is, but the NBA is back, and that'll bring us to our second topic today. We're just going to be rolling through it. We have unlimited Zoom time today, so no sense taking a break. We'll keep this part short. Again, we wanted to do a short podcast. We know the holidays coming up and all that, and with the NBA on tonight, people are going to be watching that more than a college basketball podcast, perhaps. Even though the Kansas and West Virginia game later on is going to be real big, but the NBA is a big topic right now, and we look at rookies, and I think this year more than ever, it's going to be interesting to look at how these rookies do, because rookies are going to be coming into a pandemic. You looked at last year, rookies, how would they be playing in the bubble? Well, at least those rookies had already played some games. These are going to be rookies playing with no fans in the NBA for the first time. That's got to be a little bit weird. In college, the atmosphere is so great, and in the NBA, it's a little bit different until you get to playoff time. So I just think having no fans is going to be really weird for some of these college players, where you got to bring a lot more intensity at the NBA level if you want to make it, especially if you're not one of those lottery picks. But with no fans, that's got to be weird. But with that point aside, Ariel, do you see any rookies from, feel free to say how they did in college last year too, but that you think we should really keep an eye on this season?
Yeah, one guy I really love is Isaac Okoro, a small forward for the Cavs. Looks like he got that starting nod, which means he's going to get minutes right away. He's a great defensive player. He's very athletic, good wingspan, and he looked really good in preseason. I know we didn't really have a summer league to really base the guys off against other competition. In preseason, a lot of teams aren't playing their best players for a lot of minutes. But based on the sample size, he looked really solid. I think the Cavs got a steal with that fifth pick. I don't think they're a playoff contender yet by any means. In my latest mock draft, I actually had them having the fourth worst record. But I think he's a good start. I think he's a good player for that team. And he's a good guy to grow the culture around. Another guy I have is Devin Vassell from Spurs. Of course, I can give you the LaMelo balls, the Anthony Edwards, but Devin Vassell kind of fell off the radar. DeMar DeRozan's there for another year. He's obviously a great player. But after that, it's all Devin Vassell at that small forward position. He was one of the best players towards the end of the season. He's a great coach in Leonard Hamilton at Florida State. I think he's a great two-way player. A lot of Kawhi Leonard comparisons there. So I think that Devin Vassell is a great player. Who do you think is going to be a great player? Which rookies have really impressed you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I like how you looked at Devin Vassell, because like you mentioned, a two-way coach in Leonard Hamilton, a two-way player, and how he goes into that Popovich system, that'll definitely be interesting to watch. I'm going to go with Obi Toppin's really one that's impressed me so far. I think in that first preseason game I watched with the Knicks, he really made an effort, and you could tell that he was a step above some of those guys that had been in New York for a year or two, some of those high picks already. So I just think that Toppin, and you kind of figured that. I mean, he was a guy that had been in college for a few years, but was still a lottery pick. So you're like, okay, like this guy's probably going to come in, and I would say average between 12 and 15 points a game on pretty efficient shooting. I don't think he's going to be averaging close to 20, but I think that he's a guy to keep an eye on. Where people say, oh, the Knicks make mistakes, they make mistakes, at least for this year or two when they're still rebuilding and trying to settle things. I just think that Obi Toppin might be up there. He's going to be, I think, first team all rookie. And I think he's going to be a guy that maybe surprises people. Like, okay, the Knicks got the right pick here. On the opposite end, I'm looking at Tyrese Halliburton. I really want to see how he fits in the NBA. He was a guy that I thought could have gone higher. I think at some point people thought he could be a top 5 pick, and then it really went up and down. I mean, some people were like, oh, no, he should be around 20th. But I just think that, you play with a school like Iowa State and you're such a good player. How will that translate? Because sometimes if you're not playing at those blue blood schools, those schools that don't get these high lottery picks all the time, it might be tough because the spotlight's on them and they sometimes act like they're a lot better than they maybe are. And I'm not saying that's Tyrese Halliburton. I'm just saying that I need to see him play this rookie year without a spotlight, and can he impress people? And I think those are two rookies that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I like the Tyrese Halliburton one. I think he's an interesting situation. Iowa State's actually had some good players. Monte Morris, best assist to turnover ratio in college basketball history. Taylor Horton Tucker, the talk of the NBA right now. Georges Niang got some minutes for Utah this past season. I think he's an interesting situation because he's never going to be the starter of that team. De'Aaron Fox is clearly that point guard of the future, but off the bench, he provides a different style for a team that's usually fast paced. He's a good half court player. He's a very smart player, so it should be interesting to see if that can translate. He's had some injury problems, but hopefully that won't be a factor for the Sacramento Kings.
And I guess that brings us into our next point in this NBA discussion. You mentioned Iowa State, a school that does have a couple guys in the NBA. But, I recently posted an article to our page ahead of the season with kind of like the 25. I think there might have been a couple more because of ties, but the colleges that have the most NBA players are players on NBA rosters, those college programs. And pretty much that list consisted of programs that have at least 5 players in the NBA. And there were some that surprised me, like Vanderbilt, 5 players in the NBA. Now, none of them, have done much. Aaron Nesmith, the guy from Vandy, Saban Lee also got drafted this year, so who knows how they'll do. But I kind of wanted to propose the question of, instead of looking at quantity, let's look at quality. Tell me some college programs that you think deliver the best NBA talent.
Well, the obvious number one's Kentucky. They bring the quality and the quantity. They've got superstars like Anthony Davis. John Wall was at one point, Carl Anthony Towns, Tyler Herro's emerging into a young star. John Wall in his prime was also really solid. DeMarcus Cousins. So they have to be number one. Number two is pretty hard. I'm going to go with Texas here because Kevin Durant, obviously one of the best players in the last decade. Marcus Aldridge, all-star. Avery Bradley, solid player. Jared Allen's been a great center for the Nets. So they've got a lot of good players. UCLA, in the last couple of years, it hasn't been that great, but they still do have guys like Kevin Love, Russell Westbrook, Drew Holiday, Zach LaVine. Very talented roster there. And then at 4, I'm going to have to go with Duke. I think they have a lot more quantity than quality, but they do have some guys like Kyrie Irving, Jason Tatum, and JJ Redick, some good players from that Duke roster. My last one, if we're talking 3-on-3, I'd go Oklahoma because they have Blake Griffin, Trae Young, Buddy Hield, but that's kind of it. Same with UConn. They have Kemba Walker, Drummond, Jeremy Lamb. Kansas might have to be my number 5. They have Joel Embiid, best center in the league. If depends on who you ask. Devontae Graham's emerging. Andrew Wiggins and Oubre, both solid players. And yeah, I mean, I think 1 is for sure, and then 2 through 4 are kind of locks, and then number 5 through is very much of a question mark. What do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'll do this for the sake of putting some more teams out there, but I think those 5, I don't think you can argue with those. I think Kentucky and Texas to me are the clear number 1 and 2. I might have even put Kansas up there more, just because Devontae Graham looks like he's going to be a real solid player, and like you said, Embiid. I mean, they have a superstar at that position, so not a lot of schools can say that. But I'll go with some different ones, just for the sake of throwing it out there. You look at Arizona, a school that's delivered DeAndre Ayton, Aaron Gordon, and Lowry Markkinen. Those are 3 real solid bigs, especially, and they've got 10 people in the NBA. You look at Villanova, an NBA champion in Kyle Lowry, Eric Paschall, and Omari Spellman. I think they're 2 pretty decent players as far as I don't think a lot of people thought they would even amount to much in the NBA, and they've both kind of turned into some roles, especially Paschall with Golden State. I mean, he's really done well there.
Yeah, Dante DiVincenzo too, looking like a starter
Mm-hmm.
for the Milwaukee Bucks, and he's really emerged as a great player for them.
And then I guess just to take it further, Gonzaga, they only have 6 players in the NBA, but pretty much all their players are either a solid role player or potential all-star. Brandon Clark, Zach Collins, Rui Hachimura, Kelly Olynyk, and Domantas Sabonis. I mean, that's a very good 5. Some of these teams that have more players, like Washington has 9, Florida State has 8, but Gonzaga's 6. I mean, those are better than most of these teams up here. Louisville's another one. Montrezl Harrell, Donovan Mitchell, Terry Rozier. And then I guess I'll end with USC. You got DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic. I mean, you got 2 all-stars there. I think that's very good. Again, obviously, like you said, UConn, I think a couple of years ago would have been up there. And you've seen some teams fall off. You've seen some other teams come up. I guess, we're putting up almost every team out there at this point, but Texas A&M, another one that surprised me. They got Caruso, Chris Middleton, and DeAndre Jordan. I think that's a pretty solid group of guys there.
Yeah, and Gonzaga and USC, they both have 2 top 5 draft picks, and Jalen Suggs and Evan Mobley, so they're going to add to that list. Gonzaga, honestly, I forgot about them, but yeah, they're really solid. Mark Few's clearly doing something right there because their players are really translating well into the NBA.
Yeah, they've turned kind of from that America's Cinderella mid-major team to like they might still be in a mid-major conference, but to me they're a power conference team, like they just are. And then again, now producing NBA players, like it seems like it's nothing. I mean, they got some guys that'll be all-stars. I think Sabonis, kind of already, kind of plays like an all-star, and that's a very good group of guys. But it'll take us to our C block, and we'll start with trivia. And it's trivia time. And host, if you guys couldn't tell by now, I probably should have said it in the beginning. Host Brendan Hodges, one of my classmates at Syracuse, came up with this idea for trivia. He's a big trivia guy, and it's been pretty fun. He's keeping a tally of how many questions everyone gets right. And probably at the end of the season, we'll take a look at it. We're trying to make sure that we all have somewhere in comparison the same amount of episodes. Ariel, I know this is your first time on, but I think I'm the only one who's done it maybe 2 times.
Yeah.
And, no one's really that far ahead of the rest. But just so you know, I think 5 of 7. So you have some competition here.
Oh, man, I'm not much of a trivia guy, so this isn't going to be good for me.
I kind of made it tough. I feel bad. I think you might be able to get at least one of these 3. And then if you get all 3, it's called the 4-point play. But, I'll just read you that 4-point play anyways. It just wouldn't count towards the total trivia. But I guess I'll go here with number 1, and I'll give you a multiple choice. Who is the all-time leader in points at UConn? Is it A, Ray Allen, B, Ben Gordon, C, Chris Smith, or D, Clifford Robinson?
The easy answer would be Ray Allen because of his NBA success. But I'm not sure if that's the answer. Clifford Robinson, another great player. I think I'm going to go with Clifford Robinson here.
You are wrong. It was C, Chris Smith, who, again, didn't translate to much in the NBA, but he is UConn's all-time leading scorer at 2,145 points. Ray Allen with 1,922 points at UConn. Ben Gordon with 1,795, and Clifford Robinson at 1,664. And again, Clifford Robinson passed away a couple months ago, so just wanted to add that in there. Respect to him. He was a terrific college basketball player.
Sorry, UConn fans. I'll make it up to you in another episode.
That was kind of a tough one though, because I mean, it's kind of a trick question. I mean, I think any of them could have been correct answer. But it'll bring us to number 2, which is Oregon won the first national championship in 1939. What team was the runner-up? Is it A, Michigan, B, Ohio, C, UCLA, or D, Ohio State?
Oh, man, that's a hard one. I know UCLA was so dominant, but I think that was too early for them. You putting Ohio and Ohio State in there is very iffy, so I feel like it has to be one of the 2 of them. I'm going to go with Ohio State on this one.
You got it right. I was a little iffy on that. See, that was the question. I'm like, I think he might be able to sniff this one out. Me trying to be like maybe too tricky. Any guess on what the final score might have been? Any ballpark?
I'm going to say something pretty low. The talent back then wasn't as good. I'm going to go something like 44-40.
Well, you were pretty close. It was 46-33. So
33. Can you imagine?
I can't even imagine that. I mean, it was a couple of years ago. Was it NC State game where it was like a real low scoring game? I don't remember. I'll have to get an answer on that. But
yeah, I believe they scored 24 points, if I'm not mistaken.
It was something crazy. I'm going to look it up right now while we're on the podcast. NC State basketball low scoring game.
And the fact that was such a big deal then, or the 24 points of back then, that was probably a regular score, just shows how much the game's improved, how much level of talent's improved.
Yep, NC State. the fewest points by a ranked team in the shot clock era. It was a 47-24 loss. Not only that, but it was a number 12 Virginia Tech team who put up the 47 in the win, but NC State was also ranked 23rd. So it was two ranked teams just really going at it, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Um, it'll bring us to question 3. You can't get the 4-point play anymore, but you could at least get this right and go for the old-fashioned 3-point play. And the question is, which program is not in the top 10 in all-time wins in college hoops? So again, which team is not in the top 10 in the all-time wins in college hoops? Is it A, St. John's, B, Villanova, C, Temple, or D, Notre Dame?
Well, I know that 1 and 2 are Kentucky and Kansas, but that's not relevant to the question. Villanova, I don't know how long they've been good. I know Temple had a lot of good years. Same with St. John's. What was the fourth one again?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. They're more of a football school, but I know that they had some good seasons in basketball. I'm gonna go with Villanova here.
You got that right. I'm surprised. I thought that was I'm like I think he might go Notre Dame or like St. John's, but that was smart. I mean, other than that Final Four way back in the 80s, you're right. Villanova wasn't always that great. Obviously, more recently they've been really really good. Villanova 21st all time with 1,799 wins. For what it's worth, Temple is 5th with 1,940. They're also one of the oldest schools. They've been playing basketball for a couple more years than some of these other schools, and most of these schools go back to the early 1900s. Temple went back to the late 1800s. And then you look at Notre Dame, number 8, with exactly 1,900 wins even, and St. John's at 9th with 1,871. So all those good schools, and Villanova, no shame at 21st, but talk about a team that's kind of emerged as a new age blue blood, but they're
Yeah,
not yet in the top
20
10.
years. In 20 years, we might see them in the top 10 based on how they've been the last decade, I'd say.
You really might. I mean, I was even looking at it. Honestly, by the end of this year or next, they're probably going to be all the way. They'll be up to 19th or 18th, and pass a couple of those schools that are still kind of there on that list. Just funny to see how much the list changes. But you're 2 for 3, which means you can go for this old-fashioned 3-point play. And the question is, which of these players was a first-team All-American in 2008? So which one made the first team? Was it A, Steph Curry, B, Chris Douglas Roberts, C, Roy Hibbert, or D, Luke Herringody?
Well, that's the team that Kansas won. Just wanted to throw that out there. Um, so many good college players there and good NBA players. Roy Hibbert was solid for a little bit. But if I remember correctly, Chris Douglas Roberts had a pretty good year. So I'm going to go with him, B.
And you would be correct.
Wow.
3 for 4 on the trivia. Chris Douglas Roberts averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, and almost 2 assists for Memphis. He made the first team. Steph Curry averaged 26, 4.5 boards, and 3 assists. That was his sophomore season, so he still had the next year to become really the Steph, where he went up to about 28 points a game. Roy Hibbert for Georgetown averaged 13.5, 6.5, and 2.2 blocks a game. Again, big defensive player down there. The stats weren't too impressive, but he was definitely one of the biggest guys to go up to in the Big East. And Luke Herringody, as a sophomore, averaged 20.5 points, 10.5 rebounds, and nearly 2 assists a game. So good job on the trivia. And I thought those were interestingly tough, but I think you really look at the way that I asked the questions, and you were, especially on the Ohio State one, you were able to get to the bottom of it.
I'm pretty impressed with myself, honestly. I thought I'd get 1, maybe 2 max. So hopefully this translates over to the next episode I'm on.
I think you're up there in the leaderboards already. We're gonna have to put out a graphic sometime of maybe once we get a couple more in here of the leaders for our trivia. But that will bring us into the final section of today's podcast. And again, this is a shorter version than normal. We're trying to keep it, I'd say, under around 45 minutes. But anyways, that's our game picks. And it'll start with some games that are tonight at 9. So hopefully people listen to this right away, because these games are coming up. And basically this is kind of like a rapid fire. I'll read you the team. I'll make my pick after you, and I'd say you just give me about 10 seconds of which team's going to win and why. So the first game is tonight at 9. That's kind of our headliner, and it's number 3 Kansas and number 7 West Virginia.
Kansas doesn't lose a lot of games at home, but West Virginia has those good bigs. Still, I think Kansas pulls this one off.
Yeah, I'm going Kansas with you there. So right now we both have the same scorecard. Also at 9 tonight, does number 4 Iowa drop another game, or does Purdue lose to the Hawkeyes?
I talked about it earlier, Purdue coming off that big win against Ohio State, but they don't really have anyone to guard Luka Garza. I think Iowa's got this one.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think Iowa will bounce back. Purdue does have a good freshman down there, about 7'4", but that Luka Garza senior will probably be the difference. He could expose him. Look at some games tomorrow. Got some good 3 p.m. matinee action. 13 Creighton and 22 Xavier in the Big East.
This is one of the hardest games this week. Xavier's obviously undefeated. Creighton's lost a couple trap games. So I'm actually going to go Xavier on this one. I'm going to pick the upset.
I'm going Xavier as well. So right now we're going with the same scorecard. Again, I'm kind of looking at the same reason you are. Creighton, they've been kind of suspect lately. Xavier, they're 8-0. You can't argue with it. They have some good wins as well. Another game also at 3 tomorrow. It's UCLA and the 25th ranked Oregon Ducks.
This is another good one. Two of the best teams in the Pac-12. I'm going to go with UCLA here. They just suffered a heartbreak against Ohio State, so I think they bounce back here.
We finally have a different pick. I'm going Oregon. I think this will be a real close game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins pull it out, but Oregon's got some pretty good bigs, some transfers down low. LJ Figueroa, one of them, and they've got some pretty good talent there. I think the Ducks are a team that can be there in March. We move ahead to tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. out of the Big Ten. It's the undefeated Rutgers Scarlet Knights and the number 23 Ohio State Buckeyes.
I think Rutgers has been the most surprising team in the Big 12 this year, from being projected fifth to going up to probably the second best team right now. I'm going to go with them in this game.
I'm tossing between this. Something tells me I think that Rutgers might be one of the last undefeated teams standing, even in the Big Ten. I have a feeling they rattle a couple more off in a row. They're just playing too well, and I'm going RU 2. We move to another game tomorrow night, and that's also in the Big East. This one, kind of an interesting one. You look at a 5-4 Marquette team that's 5-4, but they already have 2 top 10 wins. And can they get a third win against number 5 Villanova?
This Marquette team is one of the most interesting teams in the country. 2 big wins against Wisconsin and Creighton, but I don't think they beat this Villanova team.
Yeah, I've got Villanova as well. Just too much talent on that Villanova team. We do go now, a team you just mentioned, Christmas Day. I mentioned this one early. Number 9, Wisconsin, and the number 12, Michigan State Spartans.
Probably one of the best games this week. I don't see Tom Izzo losing 2 games in a row. I'm going to go Michigan State here.
Tom Izzo on Christmas. That's going to be something. I'm going to go Michigan State as well. December 26th, we have 2 games. Number 1, Gonzaga, and number 16, Virginia. Who wins this one?
I don't see any team beating Gonzaga this year. They're just too deep. They're too good. I'm going to go with Gonzaga here.
I'm going to switch things up. I'm going to go with Virginia in an upset. I think that this might be one game the Zags lose. I think the Zags have had a lot of really big games they've played. They've won them all, and something tells me Virginia might slow them down a little bit. And that takes us into our final one. Might not be the best game on paper, but it's definitely one to keep an eye on. It's 5-2 Indiana and a number 18 Illinois team that's already lost 3 games this season.
Yeah, Indiana's one of the more underrated teams in the country, and Illinois has been struggling recently. So I'm actually going to pick Indiana here. I don't know why, but I think they have this one.
I'll go with Indiana as well. Trace Jackson Davis against Kofi Coburn will be something to watch, and that'll be pretty interesting. I know we had some of the similar picks, but we did have some different ones, so I'll make sure to note who gets more picks right. But anyways, Ariel, thank you for joining on the podcast today. I'm sure we'll see you throughout the season.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to more in the future. Make sure to follow our social medias and to check out the website. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. So again, thanks, listeners. Make sure you heard it. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter. We just renewed our Facebook, and we put out a ton of college basketball content, so make sure to follow along. And this has been another Tuesday episode of The Review.